Hey, I'm Dusty, friends call me Moose. I'm the dude behind cameratips.com, and in this video I want to share with you some settings for taking landscapes on the Sony a6000. Now there's one thing I want to mention before we dive into the settings, and that is it's incredibly important that for landscapes we use a tripod. Even a little tabletop tripod like this can be really handy. You can set your camera on a rock or a tree. The goal is to get your hands off the camera. When taking landscapes, what we're doing is we're going to use a higher aperture f-number. And in doing so, it's going to tell the camera to slow down the shutter speed, especially when we're using an ISO of 100 to help maintain that image quality. And slower shutter speeds will lead to camera shake. Camera shake is basically the little movements that you make when hand holding the camera. So in order to use the settings that I'm about to mention, you really need a tripod. All right, so let's go ahead and jump to it. Now on the back of the camera, let's go ahead and press the menu button. And we're gonna go over to the very first tab and the very first page, and then come down to quality. Here, we're gonna set this option to RAW and JPEG. Now, what this is going to do is every time you press the shutter, the camera is going to save two files, a JPEG and a RAW. The JPEG is an image that has been processed by the camera. So it's ready to share on social media. You can save it to any device. You can print it out. The RAW file, on the other hand, is an untouched, unedited file that contains a lot more information. And this is really important for landscapes because when you're photographing a high contrast scene with a bright sky and a dark foreground, you need a file format that's got lots of information so you can recover the highlights, you can boost the shadows, and get more dynamic range. All right, so next what I want to do is show you the shooting mode. So on top of the camera, let's go ahead and rotate the shooting mode to the letter A for aperture priority. Now, like I mentioned before, we want to select a higher aperture f-number to extend the depth of field and get our foreground, middle ground, and background in focus. So to do that, we're just going to rotate this dial here. If I rotate this dial to the right, you'll be able to see I'm selecting a higher aperture f-number. A good one to start with is f11. That's going to get most of the scene in focus and make sure that things come out nice and sharp. All right, so let's go to the back of the camera and locate the ISO button here. We're going to go ahead and set this to 100. Then we're going to go into the function menu and come over to metering mode. Let's make sure that's set to multi. Back into the function menu. We're going to come over to white balance and set this to auto. Back into the function menu again, and we're going to come over to focus mode, and we're going to set this to AFS. Back into the function menu again, we're going to come over to focus area, and we're going to set this to flexible spot large. Next, on the back of the camera, go ahead and locate the drive mode button, which is the left-hand side of that control wheel. And we want to set up the self timer. I prefer 2 seconds. So what this is going to do is every time we press the shutter, the camera will count down 2 seconds, which allows us to get our hands off the camera. It gives the camera a little time to kind of stabilize and reduce any vibrations that might be in the tripod or in the camera itself, and then ensure that you get a nice sharp shot. Now there's one more thing that I find really important, especially if you're using a lens that has optical stabilization. So what we want to do is actually turn that off. In order to do so, we have to jump into the menu, and we're going to go to the very first tab, page number 6, and then come down to steady shot and turn it off. The reason for that is when you have your camera firmly mounted to a tripod, you don't want the lens trying to compensate for movements that aren't there. Again, we're trying to eliminate any form of movement to the camera or to the lens to ensure that we come away with a sharp shot. All right, so the last thing that I want to do is show you how to focus on the landscape. So to do that, we're just going to press the middle button here inside the control wheel. And using this control wheel left and right, up and down, we can move that autofocus frame around. Now, as an example, I have a little illustration here. And generally what I'll do with the landscape is I will position the autofocus frame about 1/3 of the way into the scene. So here I've got a subject in my landscape, so I'm going to go ahead and position it on that. I'm going to half press the shutter to focus and then fully press to engage the self timer to take the shot. Now, if you're still trying to learn this camera, maybe you're unsure of which settings to use, I actually just released a set of really simple cheat sheets for the Sony a6000 that show you the exact settings I use for really common scenarios like portraits, sports, landscapes, and more. You can kind of think of them like recipes. I'll show you which shooting mode, the exposure settings like aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. I also go over the autofocus modes I use depending on the subject or scene. So if you're interested in checking that out, I'll put a link down in the description below. Until next time, thanks for watching. Catch you later.